Why would a bank linked to terrorists, spies, and dictators stay open for decades? The Bank of Credit and Commerce International wasn't just corrupt, it rewrote the rules of global fraud. And yet, world governments looked the other way. This is the story of how one secretive bank became too dirty to shut down. But to understand the full scope, you'll have to see what they were really hiding until the very end. But before we dive in, let me know if you're enjoying this kind of history. Tap that like button and subscribe, only if you truly love what I'm doing here. Part 1. The Birth of a Ghost Bank. It all began in the shadows. Aga Hassan Abedi, a charismatic banker from Pakistan, had a vision, one that didn't rely on the old rules of Western finance. He wanted to build a bank that could operate globally but remain untouchable, drifting above borders and beyond regulation. In 1972, he founded the Bank of Credit and Commerce International, BCCI, with support from wealthy backers in the United Arab Emirates, especially the ruler of Abu Dhabi. On the surface, it looked like an ambitious project, offering banking to the developing world. But behind the scenes, warning signs appeared early. Shell companies were used to mask ownership. Layers of secrecy buried the flow of money. And the bank's internal structure was a maze designed not to be understood. Even as it opened branches across continents, no one could quite tell who owned BCCI, who controlled it, or where its real headquarters were. And that's exactly how Abedi wanted it. BCCI didn't act like a normal bank. It was more like a shapeshifter. Its structure was deliberately fragmented, one entity registered in Luxembourg, another in the Cayman Islands, and operations stretching from London to Karachi. There was no single central authority, no real oversight. This confusion wasn't a flaw, it was the foundation. The goal was to stay just outside any one country's jurisdiction. This setup made it the perfect haven for anyone who wanted to move money without questions. Arms dealers, smugglers, corrupt officials, and even intelligence agencies. Soon, BCCI wasn't just a bank. It was a global passport for dirty money. No compliance departments asking too many questions. No government watchdogs breathing down its neck. Just quiet rooms, offshore files, and friendly faces willing to help you disappear your fortune. For a fee. The bank sold secrecy and business was booming. In the shadows of skyscrapers and oil kingdoms, a different kind of financial empire was rising. Growth came fast, too fast. BCCI boasted of hundreds of branches in dozens of countries. It offered every kind of service, retail banking, corporate accounts, offshore holding structures, even private investment deals for the ultra-rich. But it wasn't built on solid ground. Behind the scenes, fake loans were issued to shell companies the bank secretly owned. Deposits were shifted from one arm of BCCI to another, creating the illusion of vast wealth. Auditors were misled or bought off. Annual reports were manipulated. Money moved in endless circles, and regulators, if they got close, were presented with walls of paperwork designed to confuse, distract, and delay. But it worked. The fraud gave BCCI the appearance of success. Real investors came pouring in. Governments opened accounts. World leaders shook hands with Abedi. They saw what they wanted to see. A thriving bank from the global south breaking into the elite financial world. No one realized it was a mirage built on a foundation of lies. But not all of it was fiction. BCCI did have power. It became a financial middleman for monarchs and ministers, oil barons and warlords. It helped move billions in legitimate funds, which masked the illegitimate flows hidden among them. Its web of influence reached deep into the UK, the Middle East, Africa, and even the United States. Wherever there were unstable governments or emerging economies, BCCI was there, ready to offer financial services with no strings attached. That flexibility attracted not only shady businessmen, but also intelligence agencies. It's not hard to imagine the appeal. A bank with no allegiance, no transparency, and no moral compass. To many, it was a convenient tool. To others, it was a monster growing in plain sight. But very few understood just how much darker things were going to get. What began as a bold dream had become a vessel for something far more dangerous. As the 1980s rolled in, BCCI wasn't just operating in the shadows, it was thriving in them. The more money it touched, the more untouchable it became. Laws were skirted, warnings were ignored, and whispers began to spread. Something wasn't right, but no one wanted to pull the thread. Too many powerful people were involved. Too many secrets rested in BCCI's vaults. It wasn't just a question of corruption, it was a question of how far it all went. By now, the bank had grown too complex to dismantle cleanly, too valuable to the people who used it, and too dangerous to be exposed. It wasn't just too big to fail, it was too corrupt to fail, and the worst of it hadn't even started yet. Part 2: Criminals, Cartels, and a Bank That Knew Too Much. By the 1980s, BCCI had stopped pretending. It wasn't just a financial institution, it had become a playground for the world's most dangerous players. Colombian drug cartels moved cash through BCCI like it was a personal ATM. Entire suitcases of dirty money were funneled into secret accounts. False loans were granted to fake companies with no intention of repayment. When cartels needed to hide profits, BCCI didn't ask questions, it offered solutions. Smugglers, arms dealers, even rogue states found comfort in BCCI's embrace. Saddam Hussein's regime had accounts. Manuel Noriega's network did too. Terrorist groups received quiet financing. It was a list of clients no legitimate bank would dare touch, but BCCI welcomed them. The bank staff often acted more like covert fixers than bankers, helping high-risk clients disguise transactions behind layers of offshore entities. It wasn't just criminal activity happening under the radar, it was being orchestrated through the system. And it was all done with a level of confidence that came from knowing no one would stop them. There was a reason BCCI operated with such boldness. Rumors swirled that intelligence agencies were among its most valuable clients. Whispers in diplomatic circles suggested the CIA had used BCCI to fund secret operations, missions too politically sensitive to appear on official ledgers. BCCI's global presence, lack of transparency, and willingness to break rules made it the perfect financial backchannel. During the Cold War, the U.S. was desperate to funnel money to anti-communist groups without leaving a trace. BCCI fit the role perfectly. In the Iran-Contra affair, where arms were sold to Iran and profits diverted to fund rebels in Nicaragua, BCCI's name quietly surfaced. Even more troubling were its ties to operations in Afghanistan, where money was routed to support the Mujahideen in their war against Soviet forces. These covert dealings provided the bank with unofficial protection. As long as BCCI remained useful to powerful governments, the risk of exposure stayed low. No one wanted to pull the curtain back too far. But the protection didn't stop there. BCCI was smart enough to make sure it had friends in high places. Across multiple countries, it quietly built a web of influence. Politicians, regulators, and even law enforcement officials were either bribed, compromised, or kept comfortably ignorant. It wasn't unusual for top government officials to hold secret accounts at BCCI. Some were given generous loans that were never expected to be paid back. Others received consulting fees, luxury gifts, or hidden donations. With so many influential people either benefiting or being bought, any effort to investigate the bank was slowed, blocked, or quietly dropped. BCCI operated like a state within a state. Those who tried to expose it were often met with threats or mysterious roadblocks. Whistleblowers were intimidated. Some disappeared from public view altogether. And with regulators facing a bank that had no fixed address and no single jurisdiction, oversight became a game of shadows. Every time someone got close, the trail vanished. This immunity emboldened BCCI to go even further. The bank expanded its services to new levels of corruption. It helped countries dodge sanctions. It funded black market weapons deals. In some cases, it even acted like a financial broker for war itself. In Sudan, Nigeria, and the Middle East, BCCI's fingerprints were found on deals that fueled conflict and repression. Yet no headlines screamed foul.
No governments publicly demanded answers.
The bank's survival depended on its utility, and it was very useful to the right people. The deeper it went into global crime, the more protected it became. Ironically, the more criminal its activities became, the safer it was. Everyone had something to lose if BCCI fell. And so the silence continued. It was a pact built on secrecy and mutual benefit. BCCI had become the bank of choice not just for those avoiding the law, but for those writing it. But silence doesn't last forever. While the world above moved forward with business as usual, a few individuals started noticing cracks in the facade. Auditors found inconsistencies they couldn't explain. Journalists whispered of stories they couldn't prove. And a handful of investigators began asking dangerous questions. They didn't know it yet, but they were poking a giant that had been asleep too long. Behind BCCI's polished image was a network of fraud, espionage, and corruption so vast that exposing it would mean shaking the foundations of power itself. The bank wasn't just laundering money, it was laundering truth, and the cost of unraveling that truth was higher than anyone imagined. What would follow next wasn't justice, it was damage control. Part 3: Collapse, Cover-Up, and the Truth They Buried. The collapse didn't begin with a dramatic raid or a single smoking gun. It started with scattered fragments, confusing numbers, suspicious loans, missing funds. A few auditors, regulators, and journalists began to compare notes. Their findings didn't match the bank's shiny public image. Then came the insiders, former employees, some disillusioned, others afraid, started to talk. In quiet rooms, they described a machine built on lies. The fraud wasn't a glitch, it was the system. The deeper investigators looked, the wider the corruption stretched. Entire portfolios were fake. Billions in loans were routed through shell companies. Documents had been forged, shredded, or simply vanished. What began as suspicion turned into a storm. Both the US and the UK launched investigations reluctantly at first. The bank's size and secrecy made the work slow, but the trail refused to disappear. There were too many fingerprints now. And finally, after years of denial and delay, the truth could no longer be ignored. In July of 1991, the unthinkable happened. Authorities across multiple countries moved in at once. BCCI's doors were shut. Offices were raided. Hard drives were seized. The ghost bank had finally been caught. But the takedown wasn't what many expected. There were no mass arrests.
No televised trials.
No CEOs in handcuffs. Billions of dollars had vanished. And yet the silence was deafening. Abedi was placed under house arrest in Pakistan, far from the reach of Western courts. Most of BCCI's senior figures simply disappeared into the fog. Clients with ties to criminal operations quietly walked away. Government officials who had once praised the bank now claimed ignorance. And many of those who should have been investigating it years earlier simply distanced themselves from the wreckage. What was billed as one of the biggest banking frauds in history ended not with a bang, but with a whisper. The system had folded in on itself, clean, quiet, and bloodless. Behind closed doors, governments scrambled to contain the damage. BCCI had ties to far too many powerful people. To expose the full truth would mean unmasking leaders, intelligence operations, and covert deals that spanned decades. So instead of transparency, there was fog. Settlements were made. Reports were buried under legal jargon. Regulators spoke in cautious tones. Some compensation was paid to victims, but no meaningful justice followed. The bank's inner workings, its connections to spies, warlords, and politicians, were left largely untouched in public records. It wasn't just about protecting individuals. It was about protecting the illusion of control. If the world truly understood what BCCI had been doing, confidence in the global financial system might crack. So the narrative shifted. This was framed as an isolated incident, a rare, unfortunate failure, an anomaly, but it wasn't. It was a mirror reflecting the loopholes, the blind spots, and the quiet deals that made the modern system possible. In truth, BCCI had never been just a bank. It was a vessel, a tool used by the powerful to move money without rules. Intelligence agencies used it to fund wars they couldn't admit to. Dictators used it to hide wealth they stole from starving nations. Criminals used it to clean money soaked in blood. And many governments, knowing all of this, chose silence over action. The deeper the corruption went, the harder it became to confront. To bring down BCCI was to risk bringing down the house built around it. And so, it was dismantled just enough to say it was gone, but not enough to answer the bigger questions. What about the systems that allowed it to thrive? What about the other banks quietly doing the same things today? Justice never came. Only a warning that went ignored. The story of BCCI isn't just about fraud. It's about complicity, about a world where money moves faster than morality, and where institutions built on trust can become tools of secrecy. The bank is gone, but its legacy lingers. Offshore finance still thrives. Shell companies still shield the powerful. And whistleblowers still risk everything to speak truth to silence. BCCI was too corrupt to fail, not because it was unstoppable, but because too many people needed it to exist. And when it finally fell, the world chose not to learn. Instead, it buried the truth along with the evidence. And in that silence, the cycle continued.